Welcome to the podcast, Charlotte. It's absolutely brilliant to have you on.
I'm so delighted to be here. We were just chatting, weren't we, saying that our names and our paths had crossed and we hadn't actually had a conversation. So I'm looking forward to it today.
Me as well. Our very first conversation being captured for the rest of the world to hear at a later point. So I'm going to ask you the same question I ask all my guests. What is your money story?
So I love that question because it's so open. What comes to mind for me is my money story was never pointed at me. So my money story was always about let's create or have money for other people or for experiences for other people. And my journey has been the permission piece around investing in myself on a personal and an enjoyment level. I kind of have, and I'm sure we'll touch on this, invested thousands in my business, thousands and thousands. Money was like a hot potato in my business. I couldn't keep hold of it. And it's always a piece around the whole shiny object of the next thing and the next thing, the next thing. But when it came to myself, and anything on myself, then that was a whole different dynamic.
And have you been able to change that?
Yeah, I've been able to change it. But I remember when I first started in the entrepreneurial space and first came across money mindset, it was like a huge area. And ultimately, for me personally, it was all about my relationship with myself. And was a direct relationship with my relationship with money. So once I unpicked that, and worked a lot on that, I'm now in a completely different stage. But my main kind of story around it is my dry robe story. So
please share it.
I have a real keen interest in doing obstacle courses where you get really muddy. And so the kind of key, luxury item in my head was the dry robe, which for those of you who don't know a dry robe, it's like a big oversized jacket that you can get changed underneath in, and it's super warm and it goes like right down to the floor. And so a lot of people use them like when they're doing wild water swimming in these obstacle courses, and they're about approximately, say, about £150 for like a decent one. And I remember for years thinking I would love a dry robe. I would love a dry robe, but I couldn't get one because it was a lot of money to me at the time. It was just for me. It was just for my obstacle courses. And I, for whatever reason, couldn't justify it for quite a while until I became an entrepreneur. And when I became an entrepreneur, I was like, actually, let's look at what I'm passionate about. And actually, I'm passionate about having that dry robe because I know I'm going to feel like I have made it in some way when I get that dry robe. So my story goes all through like your self-worth and every emotion possible. And then when you get the dry robe, absolutely loving it. And then how it's actually built into my business now. And I've had clients come to me when they've seen me do a live in my dry robe. And it's like, so now it's intrinsically linked into my story, but ultimately the feelings of having something that you desire that's just for you, for nobody else, was my big money story.
Yeah, and that can be so true for so many people. And you've reminded me, I've got a dry robe story as well. And it's slightly different. My son was doing rugby. He went to senior school in 2019 and was doing rugby. And it was really, really cold in that winter. And he asked to have a dry robe for Christmas. So he had the dry robe for Christmas. And then what happened in March of 2020? Lockdown. He never got to wear the dry robe, really, because as all teenagers do, he grew too much. So we have a dry robe on the back of their office door where they do their homework, etc., that really has never had the use it should have had. So I need to do something about that. And you've just reminded me of that.
And that's like heartbreaking for me. That's like, what? There's a dry robe that's not loved and not used and treasured.
It's a little bit like one of those kind of strange Tracy Emin artist things, basically, on the back of the office door. So you've reminded me I need to do something about that, because it is a real waste of money, basically. Yeah, exactly. And what's really interesting for me and what you said there, and something that I thought about, for a long period of time is that for lots of us, and me included, money mindset was never something that I thought about until becoming an entrepreneur. But because of, and again, exactly as you said, money mindset has nothing whatsoever to do with money, but everything to do with how we think and feel and behave about our own relationship with ourselves. This really should be a subject that is not just reserved for the entrepreneurial space, because those who are employed, their pay slip, the amount of money that they're paid, their bonuses, etc., that's also all tied up in their own sense of self-worth, self-value. Why do you think the whole conversation around money mindset largely resides within the entrepreneurial world rather than the world at large?
I think the entrepreneurial world has this way of viewing things quite expansive, and they're quite curious, and they're quite keen to open doors that others wouldn't open. So for so many in society, I think money's like a taboo or a secret topic. The entrepreneurials are like, yeah, let's ask people how much they want to earn. Let's ask people what they're charging. And so there's an openness and a curiosity, which are great when people are working on their relationship with themselves and with money.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And, I definitely have sensed a shift, even in the last 12 months, I think, with there being more openness around what are you charging? Why is it not on your website? Why are you making it difficult for me to decide if I want to work with you or not, rather than laying it all out on the table? When we walk into a supermarket, we don't have to kind of work our way through a whole load of information or pick up the phone and say, could you tell me how much you are charging? Why do you think that there are still some people that struggle to be more transparent about their pricing, about what you're getting for the money, about laying it all out on the table?
I think for the people that I have conversations with and that I've worked with, it's around their limiting beliefs about themselves. So there's an element with some people around like being a show-off. So they would then directly relate that, well, if I'm going to put my prices on my website, there's going to be an element of some people may think I'm a show-off. There's going to be an element of some people judging me on, can I actually do that? Who does she think she is charging that? Whatever it is. Judgment both ways, positive and not so great. And I think there's fear.
Yeah.
Fear around ownership and trusting and standing in whatever energy exchange you've put on your website for the services that you've got. Yeah. They're not to do, I always say to people, they're not to do with you. They're like the services, and here's like the investment for that service. You're priceless. You stand alone and you're totally priceless. Your services attract different ranges of investment prices, just like anything.
Absolutely.
But it's the emotional attachment to the money and to themselves.
Yeah. And it's all about the results that you are bringing for your clients and the decision that you make about how you position yourself, as opposed to how worthy you are feeling. And I think you have the same dislike for a particular phrase, the phrase being charge your worth, because that drives me absolutely bonkers. Anybody that is saying that is doing such a disservice to the person on the receiving end of it, because for all of us, if we charged what we were worth, we wouldn't have we wouldn't have a business, we would be bankrupt, because we are, exactly as you said, we are priceless. Something that I'm always, really keen to talk about is we are the author of our children's money story. So we are the ones that have gifted, and I use the word gifted because no parent sets out to give their children limiting beliefs around money. Are you conscious that you did have limiting beliefs around money you have children. Are you now conscious of how you talk to your children about money, how you talk about money in their presence?
Yes, I think there's two things. So, like, one of my threads growing up, probably by a lot of people in my age bracket, was about, working hard for your money. I've got two teenagers, and both my husband and I are both entrepreneurs. So the whole concept of money and the conversations around money have been quite open and quite freeing, in a way that you can create whatever income you desire if you are playing to your strengths. So the conversations that we have are more around understanding who you are, and then show up and find or create the channel or the model that's going to help you bring in the money that's going to be the right for you.
And when you were growing up and when you were a young adult, did you always plan to be an entrepreneur, to have your own business?
No, so I worked in various different roles, and this is an interesting one with my money stories, because I worked with charities. So my story was all about giving to everyone else, and like proving my worth, and that kind of thing was my mindset story, should we say. And so I would go for like the lower paid roles, or the struggle roles. And then when I came into the world of entrepreneurship, and then started working with multimillionaires who were scaling their businesses so quick to like a huge amount of money, it was a whole different eye-opener.
And how did that sit with you at that point in time?
So I was a little bit bowled over, because at first I was like, I've got to do some work here. There's some things that I need to work on myself to be able to hold conversations with money. Because at first, when I first went into my first mastermind, when I first started as an entrepreneur, I remember my coach saying to me, how much do you want to earn? And I didn't even want to answer that question. So I was in that place. So then I then got over myself and worked through that. And then I then had people working with me who earned a lot more money than me. So then I started to work on that. Then it was working on with people where money was, like, it's a whole different lifestyle. Like, couldn't get my head around the lifestyle type thing. And ultimately, it's always been, it's what I stand by now, on working on myself.
Yeah. And I think that is something that when we come into this world, we kind of go back to school, don't we? We go back to school as far as learning about ourselves, but also that point where you actually start to really believe in the art of the possible, because you see other people are living that lifestyle, earning that income. And the more we see the evidence of it, we have two decisions to make. We either believe it's not possible for us and we don't do anything, or we see it is possible, we believe it is possible because somebody else is doing it, and then we work out how we can go on a similar journey to realize that level of success for ourselves. As far as your children are concerned, are you, and there's a reason I'm asking this question, are you up for them going on an entrepreneurial journey from the beginning of their adulthood, or is there a different route you would prefer them to take?
Oh no, we're very, very open. My son's an entrepreneur now. My daughter will probably be one. She's in college at the moment. There's no expectation of going any particular route other than what they're guided to do for themselves, and what fits their personality, their strengths, and who they want to be. So yeah, we're not in any perception of going to university or doing anything like that, if that's not what they want to be doing for themselves.
And I have to be honest, for me, up until reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad in 2020, I was one of those parents that was very much like with my parents, you work hard at school, you go to university, you start a job, and then you work your way up the career ladder. And reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad dramatically, and I mean dramatically, as dramatic as it comes, changes my whole philosophy around parenting. And for both my boys now, I have teenagers as well. If they decide to go to university, great. If they don't decide to go to university, great. My 15-year-old already has his own little business. My 17-year-old already has a path that may or may not be going to university in mind. And I think I might have pushed or taken longer anyway to reach that point had it not been for picking up that book and really leaning into how much I had taken on board what my parents' expectations were, and probably, that the expectations put on them by their parents as well. So I think now, having the awareness that there is so much possibility, I think that's what makes this entrepreneurial journey so exciting, because the gloves are off in a really positive way, and there is nothing that is holding us back. And I think that for me is really, really motivating.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think the entrepreneurial journey opens your eyes to the limitless possibilities of success. And once you step into how they align to who you are at your core and what really lights you up and brings you happiness and joy, and then if you're able to overcome your limiting beliefs or the things that are holding you back or your fear and step into that, the immense satisfaction and gratitude and connections you can have with yourself and others is just so rich in life.
Yeah.
And it's why I'm in it, really.
And what has surprised you most about yourself that 10 years ago you would not have anticipated realizing about yourself?
That's a big question, Leslie, isn't it? I love it. Well, I never saw myself as an entrepreneur.
Same here.
So,
yeah.
So I never saw that. My husband's been one for 17 years, and he's said for years, and I've been like, oh, no, it's not for me, not for me. And I've been quite defensive. And then I just had like an aha moment that changed my life. And then it's like that was the trajectory I went on. And so I suppose for me, there's a piece around, I wonder what my life would be like if I'd never had that aha moment. And I wonder what of life I would have lived in a very limited way if I hadn't have been in a space and had an opportunity and gone for it.
Yeah. And I think that is it, because for me, I was exactly the same. I never had any ambition I was very ambitious, but I had no ambition to run my own business. I just saw myself as eventually being, the chief exec of Orange at that point in time, who I worked for. And I did leave just before there was the opportunity to become a director at Orange, but I don't know if I would ever have stayed the course, because I don't think that level of pressure was one where I was away from the house, et cetera, for an extended period of time. But if my children were very young when I left, they were 18 months, 3 years of age. If the commute to London, I live in Wiltshire, if the commute to London hadn't been one where it meant not always being here for my children at bedtime, etc., if that hadn't happened, I probably would have carried on the same path. But funnily enough, a bit like you, my husband 18 years ago became an entrepreneur. So I think he led the way. He sowed the seed, and thank goodness he did, because what was on the news today, I don't know whether you've heard this or not yet, what was on the news today was mums taking breaks from their job to look after, to be around, not look after, to be around for their teenage children, because there's a conversation being had that teenage years are actually harder than the baby years to a certain extent, and therefore mums need to be around whilst their children are going through those teenage years. And I can remember this morning kind of sending out a thank you to the universe, saying, thank goodness I don't have to make that choice. I can run my own business and be around for my children at the same time.
Oh, that's so interesting, and I totally agree with that. I've got my my teens are 17 and 18, and teenage life is, you know, an experience on many levels. It's an emotional journey, it's an identity journey, it's a self-worth journey, it's an understanding where you fit in, it's a connection journey. It's a huge, and yet I think there is a perception that those smaller changes when they first born and they first start walking are bigger, but actually the reality, I will totally agree with that. The reality in my experience as a parent is that the teenage years are where the listening, the safety, the love is just required in a different way and probably valued in a different way. And like you, I'm very fortunate and very grateful that I'm in a position to be able to have the fulfillment that I have in my role and also be there as the parent that I always hoped I would be.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. So talk to me about what you do, the work that you do with your clients as a high performance coach.
So ultimately, I work with people all over the world, usually entrepreneurs and leaders, around their overcoming fear, overcoming self-doubt, and overcoming anything that's going to feel limited for them. And then ultimately, once we've done that piece, it's stepping into their brilliance, which is their purpose and their passion and what they're here to do and the energy around all of that. And then the next piece is amplifying that. So I work with people who aren't here to settle, people who know they're here to create a big impact in the world. And for various reasons, they've not been able to fully own that or trust themselves within that space. So it's multi-varied in terms of the types of things that I work with people. But the kind of threads are usually around like empowerment, confidence, and ownership of themselves, despite what anybody else thinks. So that kind of like identity piece where there's no judgment.
And do they come to you knowing they want to amplify what they do, or do they reach a point of realization during the work with you of realizing that, oh gosh, I have been settling, gosh, I am actually capable of far more, right, okay, I'm now going to step into that reality that I've been shying away from?
Yeah, that's a great question, because that's in the work. So they wouldn't necessarily know that. I would know that because part of my strengths is futuristic. So I can see that in the person. I can see, hang on, we're only 10% living your full life at the moment. They might not know an awareness because there's a heaviness of the stuff that's keeping them stuck or keeping them in the place. So sometimes they just know that they know that they need to do some work on themselves. It's probably the space that they're in, but they wouldn't necessarily know at all the capacity of where we're going on the journey.
Yeah. And I think that is what probably lights me up as well, is supporting and seeing that transformation and somebody actually getting that self-realization that it is actually possible for them as well. So what really excites and motivates you?
Wearing my dry robe.
Do you have it now in a collection of colours?
I'm sitting on it at the moment. It's in all my, what excites and motivates? Great question. In business or personal or both?
Either or both even.
So let's go business. What excites me massively as business is those aha moments with the clients. So those like real shifts, whether they're subconscious or conscious, that are like, oh, I see it all so clearly now. And now I can do this, this, and this, and be able to really go for what I really desire. So I love them. They fill my heart. On a personal level, it's got to be adventures. So it's things like my obstacle course races, and I'm doing some different types of fitness programs to learn different ways of how the mind and body work. So a big kick for me is learning, and a big kick is learning how the balance between the mind and body works, because it's just fascinating.
Yeah.
So like I've just bought a program that's called Hips Like Honey. It's an interesting program because it's about how emotions are stored in your hips. And so you can release a lot of trauma and a lot of various emotions, and they can be locked in your pelvis and in your hips. And so there's a physical yoga type of experience within the program, as well as this releasing of emotional heaviness. Yeah. So I'm just intrigued to see. So there's definitely a piece of what lights me up is definitely curiosity of learning about other people's expertise.
Yeah. And that's really interesting, because have you found that you have always been interested in learning, or have you come back to having an interest in learning?
Oh no, I think I've always been interested in learning, on various guises, but it's been in a different way. So I've always been interested in learning in part of my thread of not feeling good enough.
Yeah.
Was about gaining all these qualifications. So I would always learn, but the reason then was about proving my self-worth. Once I did the work on myself, I was like, okay, no, actually, you do love learning as well. Now we're not proving your self-worth, you're doing it for an enjoyment piece. Yeah. So it's switched. So I think I've always done it, but the focus and the reasons behind it have changed.
Yeah. And that's interesting, because I had somebody on this podcast about 12 months ago, and they admitted they were voracious readers, read all the time, was really, really well read on pretty much any topic you could think of. And the reason for that is they didn't go to university, and they always felt less than. They always had a lack of worth, and they wanted to fill that gap with knowledge. And I probably don't know anybody brighter now than this particular person, who can talk on so many topics. So it's definitely assisted them, but the route to get there was not the happiest route for them. For me, I had almost the opposite experience, that I did English A-level, and that killed my love of English literature, because I didn't want to think about, well, why did Shakespeare use that particular word? What was he feeling on that particular day? And going to university and having to study different topics within my degree that weren't particularly exciting, I pretty much got to the end of my degree and virtually wanted to stop learning. And it was only in my early 40s did I find a topic that I was really passionate about, and that was around, the behavior of the brain and the psychology of money, etc., the neuroscience behind our relationship with money. Did I actually find my ability to sit down and consume a book again? So I've had to kind of go away and come back to it, as opposed to you finding a different reason for doing it, but always enjoying it. And that I think is lovely. Really, really
yeah,
good.
It is. That's really interesting. And I guess for anybody listening, there'll be multiple ways of how this shows up, isn't it? Some people will resonate with your journey, some people will resonate with mine, and then there will be all the other journeys that are out there as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. What is one of your favorite books that you've read from a business perspective that would be useful to share for the audience?
The Big Leap.
Snap.
It's so good.
Snap.
So good, isn't it?
If I was paid every time I mentioned The Big Leap on this podcast, oh my goodness, I can't imagine how much money I'd have in my Starling account at the moment. That book, and I'll tell you a really interesting story about that book. During lockdown, probably lots of us went on lots of walks, and we plugged into Audible or whatever. And I always had a series of books that I would listen to. And one day I was due to go on my walk, and I had no book to listen to. I thought, quick, I've got to, because I can't do my walk without my book. And I went onto Audible, and it was literally recommended reading. And I thought, I don't know if I really want to read it. The Big Leap, what's that all about? And I just feel that was the universe pointing me at the book that was probably going to make the biggest difference to me. Why do you love it so much?
I love it because it's one of those books that keeps delivering. So I say to my clients, I quite often recommend it to my clients when they first start working with me. Say, listen to it however you're going to consume it, and then I'd like you to go through it again. Because you hear things different once you've done some of the work on yourself.
Yeah.
And so you're ready to explore the next limit, the different things. And so it's like it keeps giving.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is so very, very true, because I'm working with a client at the moment, and I did exactly the same thing, recommended the book to her, and she then went through it for a second time and actually said, I actually read it in a different way. Different things came up for me the second time around. And I think it's one of those books that cannot fail to resonate with anybody, because, as you say, it's always something to come back to that you didn't necessarily access the first time around.
And I think one of the interesting things, I just want to talk about the fact that I've just started coughing on that. So one of the things that I work with people on is about energetics around limits. So when I start talking about that, the big leap, I always get this coughing, because it's all about releasing, and we're talking about money. And so this is obviously some work that I'm doing at the moment, but I do apologize if you hear the coughing in that. But it's always, I think it's a great book because it keeps giving. And I think no matter where you are, you can pick it up.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And don't worry about the coughing, because Mary, my VA, will hopefully have edited it out. So anyone listening to this now, coughing? We didn't hear any coughing. You'll know that something went on in the background. So how can people connect with you, Charlotte?
So I have a Instagram handle that's Charlotte_high performance coach. That's kind of like where I hang out most. My business is called High Performance Activator. So my website is www.hpactivator.com. And that's where you can find out all about the services and my blogs and my soon to come podcast, and listen to the kind of things that I talk with people about. But they're kind of the key ways.
Amazing. So all of those details will be in the show notes so people can easily connect with you. I want to say a huge thank you for coming on today. I've loved having this conversation with you, and I look forward to speaking to you again, hopefully in the not too distant future. Thank you.
Thanks ever so much. I really appreciate it. I've loved chatting with you too.